Well, hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for the complimentary ICMI webinar, 5 Tips for Budget-Friendly Training in the Modern Contact Center, sponsored by Oracle. I'm Christine Chisholm, Training Administrator for ICMI, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we begin, let's take care of a few housekeeping items. First, make sure you disable your pop-up blocker if it's on. You will notice there are several icons at the bottom of the console window. The first allows you to see the presentation slides, so make sure that this one is maximized. Next is the Q&A icon. We will be hosting a live Q&A throughout this webinar, and you can participate by asking questions at any time throughout the presentation. All you have to do is type your question into that window and click Submit. Now, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, you can click the question mark icon on the console to access the event help guide. Clicking on the other icons on the console will give you access to speaker bios, more information about our sponsor Oracle, and as well as information about upcoming ICMI events, resources, and research. Before we get going, I do want to let you know that this presentation will be made available for on-demand viewing following the live event today. You will receive an email in the next couple of days with instructions for viewing the recorded presentation, and you can also download a version of today's presentation in PDF form. As you're watching the live event today, we encourage you to be social. You can access your Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts directly through this event console. Please keep the conversations going and share what you learn. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. I'm joined by Justin Robbins, Jana Myers, and Joe Landers. Justin is Community Manager and Senior Analyst here at ICMI. Jana Myers is Director of Training, Development, and Support for American Century Investments. And last but certainly not least, Joe Landers is a Client Success Manager for Oracle. You can learn more about all of our speakers by clicking the speaker icon on your console. As you can see, I've shared some hashtags and handles on your screen, so one last reminder, please be social and share what you learned today. With that, I will turn it over to Justin.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you to everybody who took a little bit of time out of your afternoon to share a little bit about something that has honestly, not almost, has actually become something that really kept me up for a lot of nights as I had my career in training and development in the contact center. And you probably know what I'm talking about. It all stemmed from this conversation that was usually held in either my director or the executive for my center, usually held in their office. And it usually started a little bit something like this. Justin, I need to see you because we need to talk about the contact center's training program. And if you were anything like me, you knew that when this conversation was about to begin, chances are it wasn't going to look good. And I can actually remember one of the first times I had this conversation. The center that I was working in at the time, we had about a 6-week training program for our new hires. 6 weeks in training, start to finish. After the 6 weeks, they were on the phone. My director at the time had looked at the schedule that we had put together and the plans for this 6-week new hire training program, and they said, Justin, I'm looking at this program, and 3 weeks of it, I'm really not seeing the purpose of 3 weeks. I have a suggestion. What if we cut that 3 weeks of training that you have built in, part of half really of the 6-week training program, what if we took that 3 weeks of training and we condensed it down into 1 day? What do you think that your agents could effectively learn in that 1 day of training? Didn't take me a whole lot of time to think about this, 3 weeks down to 1 day. I knew exactly what my agents would learn. They would learn how to hate their jobs. But the reality is, for so many of us, with our training programs, particularly new hires, and for some of us even more with our refreshing and kind of ongoing training, right, for so many of us, this is a challenge. This is a reality of how do we create the biggest impact, how do we ensure that our time in training and our time developing our employees really has the greatest level of return. Because the reality is that we're all challenged by a number of factors that prevent us from doing so. And so what I would love to do with the time that we have here today is I want to be really transparent about what are the barriers to our training programs today. I spent a lot of time in classrooms and contact centers and still continue to do so. And these three barriers continue to show their ugly faces time and time and time again. And time again, I work with and I have conversations with contact center training and development professionals who aren't prepared to handle these barriers, who haven't made the plans to move past them. And really, above all else, they struggle with truly showing the value of their training and development program. And we come to this question at a certain point in the road of our training and development programs where we almost want to ask. We want to ask that person who's telling us to cancel training for the day or to cut down time. We want to ask the question, what do you think is really more important, the contacts that are in queue right now or training and development in our contact center? And depending on who you ask at any given moment in time, the answers that you can get may vary. But what I want to share with you and what I want to get and see each one of you get to the place of finding is that when you put the right program in place, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, and a lot of the things I'm going to share today probably don't cost really any money. But when you put these things in place and when you effectively build your training program, you're going to find that having the time, having the resources to have that impact on your agents and ultimately have the level of performance that you want really is possible. And so what are the biggest challenges facing training today? And really there are two enemies in the face of our training programs, and one of them is time. Number one thing that I hear from contact center professionals, and the number one thing that I used to say when people say, what's the biggest challenge with your training program? And I thought, I don't have enough time. I never have enough time, and whether it's with new hires or it's with my employees who I need to sustain and engage throughout their time and throughout their career in the contact center, I never have enough time. And something else you should probably know about me is I've spent a number of years in small contact centers. Right, we're talking small contact centers. One of my centers had 10 seats. Another center that I spent a number of years in was just under 30. And so one of our biggest enemies was simply just not having the funds to do so. And so looking at these two things, time and money, time is money for so many of us, right? How do we get past them? How do we get past these enemies and the other barriers to our training program? Because the reality is that every single one of us has the exact same number of hours in the day, at least I think. Right? We all have the same number of hours in the day, and so how do we make the most of those precious few hours that we get? How do we make the most of that time and do so effectively and do so efficiently? And so before we start with these three barriers to learning, I really want to ask each one of you, and to be thinking in the back of your head, what's the thing that is wrong with so many of the new hire training programs that are out there today? And the reality is, it's not that there is not enough time, right? That's an enemy, but it's not the reality of what's wrong with so many training programs today, and it's not money either, right? The biggest problem that I see with so many new hire training programs in particular today is that it takes too long for an employee to start feeling like they've made a difference. And the reason I say that is because really that's the number one thing that employees, when they go into an organization, that they're craving. They're craving to show that they can have an impact, that they can matter. And it doesn't matter if that's a frontline level agent. It doesn't matter if it's a workforce analyst. It doesn't matter if it's a director. Everyone wants to know that they can make a difference, that they can have an impact. And our training programs, by and large, take too long to get there, no matter how long or how little we have when it comes to time and training. And so talking about these two enemies, time and money, really brings me to the first barrier to learning, the first barrier to training that we experience in our centers. And they're situational barriers. Right? Time and money, the two biggest enemies, actually just fall into one of these barriers in general. We just don't have the time available. We haven't made the time available. And going back to that conversation that I had in one of my first contact centers where my director at the time asked me to take 3 weeks of training and condense it down to 1 week. The reason they asked me to do that wasn't because they thought that having agents on the phone for those additional 2 weeks and 4 days was going to make that much of a difference on the center. The reason they asked me to do that is because they didn't see that time that we were spending was an effective use. They didn't see that those 3 weeks were effectively engaging our agents to do their job. And so the first suggestion I have to contact centers who are up against this barrier of time, and someone's saying, well, I understand what you're saying, but you need to be taking this amount of time. I don't care if you're saying it's 6 weeks. I need to see it happen in 3 weeks or 3 days. The first thing we need to do is, are we using the time to the best of its ability? And when I talk through these 5 critical concepts that I want you to look at and evaluate your training program and give you some free ideas on how you can accomplish them, it's about maximizing the time that you have to its fullest. It's about understanding what the most important things to spend your time in training on and using the time that you do have available to accomplish those things. The money conversation I can understand as difficult, and believe me, I have been in enough toe-to-toe conversations to realize that, by and large, my training program was perceived at a pure cost to the organization. It wasn't always easy to see the value, to see the ROI of a training program, but what I'm going to say is that every single person that's on this webinar today, by the end of the day, I want to talk to you about 4 ways that you can evaluate your training program, 4 ways that you can go back and articulate what the true return on training is. Because when you can demonstrate and when you can show the actual value of your training, right, you'll begin to see that the resources that you need when it comes to time and possibly even money, the resources that you need to continue to make that difference start to become available to you. And the other type of situational barrier really comes down to other responsibilities. I know that a majority of contact centers out there are small contact centers. And I know that a majority of leaders in small contact centers don't just get to wear one hat. Even in large centers, I've seen that a majority of leaders don't have the convenience, don't have the luxury of just being able to focus on one thing. And as a result, that becomes a barrier to training. One of my centers, I can remember that I was responsible for coaching all of our agents, conducting all of the Q&A, as well as doing the training. As you can imagine, something had to be sacrificed. Something had to suffer as a result. And until I became intentional, and until we become intentional in our responsibilities and focusing on what's most important, time, money, and other responsibilities will continue to eat away at the core of having an effective training program. The second barrier that we're going to be looking at in our contact centers is really institutional. You know, there's a story I've told time and time again about an old family tradition of mine. Right, something you should probably know about me is I'm the cook in my house. I love to cook. It's a creative outlet, and I couldn't enjoy it more. And when my wife and I got married, I was so excited for our first Christmas together to make the storied Christmas dinner that I had grown up experiencing from my mom and from my grandmother. And the cornerstone of this was really the ham that we prepared each year. And the other important thing you need to know about my wife is I love her for so many traits, but her ability to cook is not one of them. And so she wanted to learn, and this was also really cool for me. But she's also really detailed. And if you're not necessarily always an entirely detailed person, and you spend a lot of time with someone who you know that sometimes it can get a little annoying. They ask a lot of questions, right? And so as I'm preparing the meal, my wife was constantly asking, well, why are you doing this that way? Why did you measure that amount? Why are you doing these things? And we got to the preparation of the ham, and I got out the cutting board, and I did exactly as I watched my mother do, as exactly as she watched her mother do. And I cut both ends off my ham, stuck it in the pan, and put it in the oven at 350 degrees. And my wife, of course, asked the question, why did you cut both ends off of the ham before sticking it into the oven? To be honest with you, my answer was that's what I've always seen my mother doing. She said, well, can we ask your mom why that was? So we get my mom on the phone, and Mom, hey, we're preparing Christmas dinner, and my wife, Marie, really needs to know why we do this. She said, honestly, Justin, I'm not entirely sure. Your ma'am, my grandmother, always did it that way. And so now you can probably imagine my wife and I kind of two-eared on a cell phone. We have my mom, and we bring my ma'am into the phone conversation. We ask her, ma'am, why do we cut both ends off of the ham? And she stopped and paused and laughed for a minute. I don't know if you've ever been on the phone with an older relative or an older friend, and when they get to a certain age and then they just pause and start laughing hysterically for no reason, you have to wonder a little bit. And she without taking a breath in the last, she said, well, I don't know why you guys did it, but I did it because I didn't have a pan that was big enough. And this reminds me that a lot of times in training, we're doing these things, we're looking at these established practices, these old adages, these traditional ways of doing things, and we neglect to ask the question of why are we doing it in the first place? And often that's one of the biggest barriers to our training program, is that's the way we've always done things here. In addition, other institutional barriers that we could experience are just simply limited offerings and limited things that enable us to deliver our training program. Another possible barrier is inconvenient times and locations. I remember fighting tooth and nail just to get a room where I could hold my training. Forget having any type of screen or projection system to show what was on my laptop. And what I had to do was find a way to overcome that. And maybe you experience these as well. And some of the more unconventional things I would do is, for example, when I worked with a catalog fulfillment company and we had a retail chain, we happened to have that building a short walk from our offices. And so what I did one day when I didn't have a classroom for training, I said, today we're going to spend some time on product knowledge. And rather than take you into the classroom and show you some screenshots, let's walk down the street, and I want you to touch and feel and experience these things firsthand. Other things I've done is just taken my group outside. Let's get out of the building and let's just talk. Let's start working through how do we build relationships with our customers. Maybe you have a number of things that you've already tried in your organization, but it's not a matter of complaining about the things you don't have. It's a matter of looking at through the lens of what are the things that we can do? What are the possibilities that exist here? And really the third barrier to learning, the third thing that gets in the way of so many training programs are known as dispositional barriers. And these can come from a number of sources. These could be the actual training in your classroom. These could be your peers. It could be the supervisors or managers of these agents. It could be the managers or the leaders that you're training. But these things such as varied attitudes, different opinions, and skewed perceptions can also eat away at the core of why we're having training. And I got to be honest, for a lot of these people with these poor attitudes, with these mixed opinions, with these skewed perceptions, I can't say that I blame them. Because the reality is so many of us, for having such limited time and such limited budget and training, we focus so much on woe is us and focus so much on the things that we can't do that we neglect to take the time to prepare and really measure whether or not our training is effective. Really make sure that the things that we're spending our time when we're in the classroom, when we're training these individuals, making sure that we're spending them on the most important things. And often what's driving these dispositional barriers as well, or maybe you're more tenured agents who are thinking, I don't need to learn this. Maybe it's that fast learner who's wondering, why is it taking so long for these other people to understand this concept? And the challenge for every single one of us in our contact centers as learning and development professionals, really as contact center leaders, is not to act like these barriers don't exist. It's not to ignore them when they appear in our center, but it's to be honest and transparent and truthful that they're very real, and that without addressing them and without preparing for them in advance, they're certain to get the best of us. And so that's really the first place that we start. If we really want to make the most of our training in our contact centers, we really want to be able to implement even low and no-cost ideas, where they're still going to take some sort of time from us. They're still going to have some sort of requirement, and they might even take some level of buy-in from maybe your leader in the contact center or your peers in the learning and development part of your organization. Right, and so until we address those barriers first and foremost, we can't get to the good stuff. We can't get to really deploying these 5 crucial concepts for contact center training. And so that's where I want you to think first. And now that being said, what I would really love to do is jump in to talk about 5 crucial concepts, 5 topics, 5 things that should be part of your training program. And in addition to just saying, hey, this is stuff that we should really be teaching to our agents, I also want to give you some ideas and some suggestions and some tales of things that I've done in my time as a contact center learning and development professional to help educate, prepare, and really help my agents get to the place of making a difference as soon as possible within my organization. And so really the first place to start, and I'm going to bet that many of us have within our contact center training program today, is really just the foundations of great customer service. And I know that some of us may have robust interviewing, robust screening programs that we have in place to really try to figure out who are these people, who are the right fits to be in a contact center, right? Who makes the right agent, what is that DNA? And we try to screen for these things up front. Now, where we get challenged sometimes is we focus maybe a little bit too much on technical skills for some of us and not enough on whether or not the agent actually has a personality. Right? Part of the foundations of great service is recognizing not just what great service looks like, but it's also owning when poor service happens and using it as an opportunity to move forward. I'm probably preaching to the choir when I say that the customers, when you talk to customers to find out how are they most satisfied and how likely are they to continue to do business with the company, believe it or not, the customers who have an issue and it's effectively resolved often rate higher than customers who had no issue at all. And it's probably, a cliche to say that those mistakes and the times when we have bad experiences are our best opportunity to improve. There's the golden nuggets, but the truth is they are. And so one of the free and no-cost training ideas that I have when you're doing foundations of great customer service is to have a no-stakes approach to recorded contacts. And maybe that's phone calls. Maybe it's also chats. Maybe it's social media interactions. And what I mean by that is you enable your agent to bring the good, the bad, and the ugly of their customer contacts to you. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, so we're going to score them, and we are going to come down with the wrath of all that we have on these agents. And because our agents expect us to do that, we are only ever going to get the great contacts. And what I'm here to tell you is that when we approach it from an opportunity to learn, when we approach it from an opportunity to gain buy-in, you'd be amazed at what will happen with your agents. And so I implemented this no-stakes quality program where if you had an interaction, good, bad, or indifferent, but you wanted to have a conversation with your coach about it, we asked you to just bring it to our attention. And so at first, some of my critics said that you're only going to get the good interactions. But what I actually found is that my agents, when you build that level of trust, when you build that level of rapport, they want to get better. They want to be doing a great job, and they don't want to feel disabled. And when you can have an open and honest and transparent conversation, not only are they then bought in, not only do they then come to you and say, Justin, I just made a really boneheaded mistake, and I need help because I don't know what I could have done differently. When you have conversations like that, they're amazing tools for learning and development. But beyond that, you start to build this repertoire of good and bad contacts, good calls, bad calls, good emails, bad emails. And when you have that ownership and buy-in from the agents, you can now have this repository available. So you have a new agent on the center floor, and they want to be able to hear examples of somebody who effectively handles a guest who's escalating, who effectively handles a customer who's going to defect. And you can go back to this call recording library, and there are a number of softwares and programs that allow you, if you have call recording, to export that into a playable audio file. Some it's simply just a library of dialogues and transcripts of conversations for agents. And maybe you think, well, you know what, Justin, I don't know about that as an agent training tool. I don't know that I feel comfortable with that. Well, here's another option for you, for your supervisors and your managers and your coaches in the contact center, and that's to start a library of how different interactions are coached. And then when you have an employee who has a problem, it's by no means a cookie cutter to apply to that situation, but it allows them to go back and see, I'm not sure how to address this issue that we're having with this agent. I'm not sure how to approach this circumstance. And you now can have a library of how others have effectively coached and the results that they've seen with other employees. And it becomes a great tool to help you reinforce the foundations of great customer service. Another key concept to train in the contact center is just the downright fundamental contact center dynamics. And by and large, if I were to say what's the number one thing missing from so many contact center training programs today, it's this. We spend so much time training our agents on our systems, so much time training them on our processes, or even our customer service skills, that we neglect to train, we neglect to inform and educate our front line on the simple dynamics of how we staff in the contact center. We don't talk about our coaching programs or how we forecast contact volume. And so often then, by not knowing, it's almost impossible for our agents to engage and to understand is why their break is scheduled at a certain time, or why it makes a difference that they show up at 8 o'clock instead of 10 after 8. And especially for agents who've never been in the contact center before, the dynamics of the contact center environment, particularly for those of us who are inbound, the dynamics of that environment are unlike many other situations. And so a cheap and even free way to do this is an exercise called the Power of One. And I was faced with this challenge just one day with my agents, one of my first times training in a contact center, where they really didn't feel that they made a difference. They said, Justin, our center is X number of people large. What difference does it really make if I go to the water cooler, start my break 2 minutes early? What does it really matter? Why does it really affect what we do here? And the Power of One is a great exercise where you line agents up on either side and you really show and you play out in real life the dynamic of inbound calls, and you play the dynamics of whether you have enough or not enough agents to handle the calls. And I've seen some people do it with ping pong balls. Honestly, the day that I wanted to do this exercise, I didn't have the budget to do anything. And I went into the break room, and, we always have luncheons at our contact centers. You know what I'm talking about. Went into the break room, and there I found a clean, empty plastic ice cream bucket. I grabbed that ice cream bucket. I went into my office, and I found one of those stress balls, and I grabbed the stress ball, and I said, this is how we're going to learn about how we staff and how we forecast volume and making sure that the right person is in the right place at the right time. And it's an incredibly effective exercise, and maybe it's one that you've done in your contact center before, and maybe it's one that you're interested in. If that's something that you're interested in, I would love to share with you how to set that really acute game, how to set that training game up for your center. Happy to give you any of the resources that you need to make that happen. But Power of One is one of the most effective exercises that I've seen in my contact center to just teach the foundations to our agents of why do we forecast, why do we staff the way that we do in the contact center. Another important piece of training that really, again, doesn't require any additional money, doesn't require you to go out and bring any sophisticated programs, anything into place. It's just taking a look at an understanding of the metrics, the scorecards, the things that you're using to measure success in the contact center. And often for so many agents, they don't actually see their agent scorecards. They don't get a quality interaction scored on them. They don't have a coaching conversation with someone until they're out of training. And the things that we often miss with these conversations and the things we often forget with the metrics that we measure in the contact center is explaining the what we measure, the things we're holding the agents accountable for, why we hold them accountable for those things, and how we're going to have conversations with them. And one of the most impactful things that I did in my training program that cost me no more than a little bit of a person's time was to bring each of those key stakeholders into my training and spend a little bit of time with my new hires. And so I'd have a workforce manager come in, and they would talk a little bit about schedule adherence. We'd do the Power of One activity, and they would talk about why that's so important for the contact center. And then I'd bring someone from my quality team in, and we'd talk about customer satisfaction and how do we measure customer satisfaction? What does that really mean? And what's the impact that every single agent has on driving customer satisfaction? And we move from metric to metric and focus on what are the things that are most important to us, and how does this align with who we are as a contact center? Because all too often we have metrics, we have things that we're measuring in our contact center, and we kind of hide them, maybe not intentionally, but we just forget to mention that to the agent while they're in training. And then they get out onto the floor, and these questions begin, and disengagement starts to show its face because we haven't been entirely transparent on the metrics, the what, the how, and the why of what we'll be measuring. Another great activity you can do as a training exercise, especially if you're going through some change in your contact center and looking at a fresh way of doing things, is involving your agents in an exercise on developing your agent scorecard. How can they best use the information? What's most important to your agents? And is that the same thing that's most important to you? And if that's the case, is it most important to your customers? And how are you aligning with each other? Again, when it comes to metrics and what do we put in front of our agents and how do we best explain it and what are some ways that we can engage them? Again, offering myself to have deeper conversations here. But these are important training fundamentals. They don't take extra money. Really what they just take is focused time and intentional effort on spending time with our agents on the things that really matter and will ultimately affect their performance in the contact center. So speaking about transparency and speaking about things that we should do in training and speaking about things that ultimately drive performance in the contact center, I want to talk about the importance of training our agents on the tools that they're going to be using during training. And I don't mean what you're probably thinking. I don't mean showing them the best case scenario. I mean showing them the good, the bad, and I know it exists for all of us, the ugly of those systems. And here's why I say that. When we hide our system inefficiencies, when we bypass the challenges and the realities that our agents face, what happens is they create shortcuts. And we all know they're creating shortcuts. And historically, our approach is to go back and we do the little slap on the head. No. Remember how we taught you in training. Remember how we showed you the best practice way. And the challenge with that is if our system inefficiencies exist, and if we're not doing anything about them, the minute we walk away, our agent will go back and do that again. And so from a training and from a leadership standpoint, we have two options. The first of those options is in training, we as leaders, we as the trainers, we as the managers, we as the directors, identify what are the best shortcuts, what are the best opportunities to work around the inefficiencies of the system. Because you have the option of letting the agents in control of creating those shortcuts, or you have the ability and the authority as the leaders to identify what's the best way. And many of you might be sitting at your phones and your computers right now shaking your head thinking, no, not going to do that. Then the other option and the other reality is for us to look at our systems, look at our processes, and invest in tools and resources that don't require those shortcuts. But the reality is for 92% of us, ICMI research shows 92% of us say that our agent-facing applications are not as efficient as they could be. And that's a hard truth to think about. But the reality is if we want to have effective training and we want to make the best of these efforts and we want to ensure that our agents are successful, then we have two options. And the option is to make sure the tools are effective, or we can work with our agents to identify shortcuts that won't stress them out, that won't burn them out. Because if we don't do those things and they create those shortcuts on their own, then we've kind of been self-defeating because agents are just going to then look for another opportunity with another organization that's going to take the time to invest to make sure that they can do their job as best as they can. And so you'll find that honesty and that awareness at the onset and that transparency about what you can and what you cannot do, understanding the opportunity as well as the limitation, will have a tremendous impact on the performance and the engagement of your agents. This last crucial concept for training is to give our agents, give our employees the opportunity to experience our organizations from the customer's perspective. And some of us, this will be easier to do than others, but I ask every single one of you, do your agents have the opportunity to be customers of your company? Because the reality is that our customers get to experience, get to view our organizations with a different set of eyes than we do. And we may know all of the trade secrets, and we may know all of the insider information, but until you're actually a customer, it can be extremely difficult to relate to them, to be in their shoes. And that's often one of the biggest challenges with training is just simply being able to put ourselves in the customer's shoes. And for some of you, this may be free to do. With some of you, there may be a cost associated, but I challenge you to ask, is the value in the end, is the return of doing this worth the investment? And so now that we've talked a little bit about these barriers, now that we've talked a little bit about 5 crucial concepts and just a few brief and suggestions of ideas of if we implement them, what are some ways that we can do this? I also want to talk about something that really is going to help you get the maximum return out of your contact center. When we talk about free, low, and no-cost training ideas, really it's about understanding the impact that your training is having so that you can invest whatever time, whatever budget, whatever resources you have available. You want to invest in the things that are going to have the biggest impact on your center. And so evaluating your training's effectiveness, there's really 4 levels in which you can evaluate your training's effectiveness. And so I want to talk through each of these with you, but if this is something you're looking to dive deeper, I wrote an article on this, and I'd be happy to share that with each of you, diving deeper into how do we evaluate the effectiveness of our training program. Because again, no matter how much time or how little time, how much money, how little money we have available, what really matters is, are we making the most of the training and the time and the money that we're investing in the development of our agents? And so the first level that we really need to be evaluating our training is simply reaction. And at this first level, we should be capturing data throughout, or at the very least, the end of our training. And this is looking at how our attendees found value in areas such as the program methodology, the exercises that they experienced, the quality of their materials, their facilitators' knowledge, even things such as the facilities, the temperature, and what overall strengths and opportunities they see on the back of this program. And really a critical component to this is surveying these agents, but not just surveying, but keeping the survey as close to the end of training as possible. And on top of that, another recommendation is to keep the survey in the same format or the same channel as training. So, for example, if you have a student using an e-learning module, then the survey that they complete should be built into that e-learning system. The second level, the second way in which we want to evaluate whether or not our training is effective, it's really this process of collecting, analyzing, and reporting information to determine really 2 things, both how much the participant learned and how that knowledge was applied during their time in training. And what happens is the insight that we gain at this level, we can start to make decisions on how effective the trainer is at facilitating the content. We can determine whether or not the content, its sequence, or even the way that we prioritize and emphasize it is appropriate. In addition, we can look at the exercises and the instructional methods, and we can revisit how we allow opportunities for practice and application. And this piece in particular, I have built out an entire evaluation that you can use. And if you're responsible for the training program, you can sit in the back of the room, and it's a great form, a great quality process for understanding how effective your trainers are and how conducive that environment is to learning. And that alone sometimes it is enough to provide the return and the value back on the training program. This third level of evaluation is really assessing the degree to which the knowledge, the skills, the abilities that we teach in the classroom are actually being used on the job. And maybe some of you know this as knowledge transfer. And really the barriers that we encounter, these barriers are going to be uncovered most often during this third level of evaluation. And the key is once we identify these, we can start to make decisions on what needs to change. Is it the content? Is it our strategies? Is it our resources? Maybe it's the trainer. But the evaluations at this level allow us to make the actual system and tools changes that we need. This is the level in which we can actually assess at a deep level what's happening in our training program. And this last piece, this fourth level, is really determining the impact of this training long-term on the overall organization, on productivity, on customer satisfaction, even on the contact center's strategic role in the organization. And really it's looking at what's the change in business metrics as a result of this training, and even more so, what is the return on the investment? And what happens here when you do this level of evaluation, it doesn't matter if the return on training is customer satisfaction, increased conversion rates, even improved process efficiency. What's happening here is that you now have a comprehensive process that gives you quality insight, actionable improvements, and most importantly, a clear understanding of the benefits of your training program. Once you do that, you can have the fun, you can have the liberty to really create those engaging experiences, to throw stress balls into ice cream buckets, because you've aligned the effectiveness of your program with the things that are most important. Right? And that's really what I like to think of as like the magic sauce that needs to be in place. It's the content that's most important, and it's articulating and understanding the return as a result. But having those things in place, that's when we can start to say that our training ideas, the low, the low and the no cost things that we're doing, we're actually proving tremendous value. And maybe if it's needing more time, maybe if it's needing more money, we can finally get to a place of being able to do that. And then and only then, when you accomplish this, when you can get to this level of training effectiveness, training is then no longer a consumer of that valuable time. It's no longer a consumer of money, but it becomes this generator of value and sustainable long-term improvement for your organization. And really, that's the place that we all want to be. And so to kind of wrap things up here, is you're looking at your training and you're looking at low and no cost ideas right now, and I do hope some of them are of interest to you, and I'd love to provide you with even more of them beyond the short time that we could spend here on the webinar today. But the key here for you, no matter what you're doing, no matter how much or how little time, is that first and foremost, your training program is, and your evaluation is providing quality insight, actionable improvements, and this comprehensive understanding of what are the benefits of training. When you're doing that, you're going to see that your training generates value, not just for the trainees involved, not just for the contact center, but for the entire organization. And on the back of that is an opportunity for sustainable improvement. It's important for, as you're developing these training programs and as you're evaluating and as you're implementing ideas, that you're considering the experience of your trainees. You're experiencing all the data points along the way, such as the environment of the room, the trainer's expertise, and the quality of the materials. You're transparent about those three barriers, and you know which ones are getting in your way, and you also have identified ways that you can enable and ways that you can get beyond them. And last but certainly not least, you've taken the time to align what you're doing to the overall strategy of your organization, really elevate the value that the contact center is providing. And so I would love to have deeper conversations. I would love to provide more tools, resources, and ideas to you. And if that's the case, I'd love for you to shoot me a note, and we can have those deeper conversations. That being said, with the time that we have left, we've invited both Janet and Joe to this call, and I'd love to ask some of them some questions that I kind of have on the back of some of the things that I shared. And this is also going to be a great opportunity where we'll bring in some questions. I see that some have come in from those of you listening. We'd love to ask those as well. So Janet, Joe, just welcome, and thank you for joining us on the webinar today.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. So I want to start with a fun one. I shared a couple of different training ideas, just kind of general tips and also some resources. What's maybe one low or no-cost training tip, idea, exercise that, Jenny, you found successful in your contact center, or Joe, you found in the contact centers of your customers?
Yeah. I'll start with that, Justin. So when we went to the ATD conference about a year ago and really came away with a desire to start using subject matter experts, SMEs, in our classroom, much more than we had. And so we have woven in a number of people from the business, you referred to this earlier on the call, to talk about things like transactions, to talk about specific topics. Who better to come in and talk about what's going to be expected of new hires than their manager or supervisor? We invite people from other areas of the business to share their perspectives. It's people from individual contributors to a call center rep. Who better to tell you what the day-to-day of your job will be than someone that's actually doing it? We bring in our coaches, managers, our support people, and really try to utilize the folks that we have and the resources that we have in our business partners, rather than making all of that fall on the shoulders of the trainers. And it's much more effective.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you, Jenna. Joe, how about you?
You know, it actually, my experience comes from my own personal experience, not from my clients, and it was one of the things we enjoyed the most and got the most bang for the buck for that was cheap, was we decided to either start, giving out, small $5, $10 Starbucks gift cards, or just recognize people for those that got perfect quiz scores. So we used our LMS system to be able to quiz agents out on the floor, and whoever got the top 10, the top 20, whatever the numbers are in your call center that identifies the top 5, 3%, whatever, we would post it in a public place for whoever got perfect scores. And that did two things for us. One, it allows us to identify who subject matter experts were that may not correlate necessarily with what the performance scores showed. But secondly, it would for those that maybe didn't have great performance but were super smart on the topic, all of a sudden it motivated them to see. They look up on the board, they see that they're in the top 3, top 10, whatever, and then people would ask them, "Wow, I didn't know you were that good," and all of a sudden their performance would pick up too, because they saw the expectation should be a little higher for someone that knows that much. So that was pretty cheap and inexpensive. That really helped drive some performance for us.
Yeah, that's awesome, Joe. And, I can attest to it's not a matter of, to a certain degree, we kind of inspire that competitive nature in people. But when you do it the right way, people are actually inspired by it. They want to know, I see that you were recognized for providing this really great experience. What did you do? I want to be like that. I want my name up there. And you're right. It's an inexpensive idea, and it does inspire and it does drive people to elevate their performance and their game that they're bringing. Those are both really great ideas. Thank you both. So one of the things we talked about is time and training. What advice do you have for someone who's under pressure to shorten the amount of time that their agents have in the classroom?
Well, Justin, that's extremely common. As you were talking about that, I was comparing our own experience. We also have a 6-week training program for our new hires. And talk about something that is a legacy type of program. We had a program that long for a number of years. It worked in our estimation, but last year we looked at that, took a long look at that, and retooled it to add a whole lot more practice. We still have 6 weeks of training, but we've inserted classroom and actual practice with calls on the phone into that training. So the first 2 weeks they're in the classroom, then they have a week of practice, and the business is actually getting a return from these brand new people because they are taking some sorts of calls and building their confidence level, building their expertise. Then we bring them back in, and then we put them back after 2 more weeks on the phones again. And so they've moved up a level. They're much more confident than they were when they started. Again, the business is getting a return from these folks while they're quote-unquote in training, and that's very attractive to people in our leadership group to know that we've hired these folks and it's not waiting for 6 weeks for them to actually be doing their role.
Jenna, and what I love about that, it answers that question of what's wrong with so many of the new hire training programs, and it's that piece of taking too long to make a difference. And so when you have that blended approach that they're starting to actually apply the things that they're learning, then they can see these little benchmarks along the way that I'm having an impact. What I'm learning is I can actually see how I fit in here. I can actually see how I make a difference. And you're right. On both sides, the organization benefits, but so do those new hires and those trainings. Absolutely. Joe, thoughts from you?
Yeah, Jenna, you mentioned that it doesn't take so long for them to make an impact. I think as an agent, from what I've seen with my clients and my own personal experience as well, having been one myself, is that you want to make an impact immediately. You want to feel like you're doing something. You want to take this learning, you want to apply it. If you go through 6 weeks of training, you're going through book training, classroom training, learning about the tools and all this, and you don't apply any of it in the real world, by the time you get around to doing it, you're having to fetch back 5 weeks ago, what did I learn? So
Absolutely.
each week, you insert 2 days or maybe 4 hours a week of, Academy Bay, Learning Pod, Training Wheels, whatever program you want to call it, where they actually take live calls for a segment that's relevant to the training material they just received. So, for example, maybe in week 1 you just cover, they just handle some billing calls, some very simple things. Then maybe the next week they begin to handle some simple technical calls. And after that, you kind of ramp it up over the course of the 6 weeks, but you can't get around the 6-week requirement. Every company has a really long polls for how much training they need to deliver. But I think it's imperative that you insert that those production calls in there so they can apply their learning.
You bet.
Yeah.
And if I could just layer one more thing onto that, we've also instituted, when they first start on the phones, they're not doing it necessarily alone, so they have a buddy that will help them through that process.
Yep.
So that also gives them the sense of, hey, I'm also helping this person next to me in the classroom be better, and they're helping me, which gives them even more buy-in.
Yeah,
and that helps
absolutely.
on the floor when you get to the floor also. I'm sorry about that, Justin. It helps you when you get to the floor. You build up that buddy system and that team mentality that we're helping each other. So pairing them up, I think, is an excellent idea.
You know, one of the things that we did, and I saw we had a question about it as well, is we loved, in addition to bringing those different stakeholders, workforce, quality, whoever, into training, we would also bring in, we had tenured agents who were assigned as mentors, and they would come in and they would deliver some of the training. They would have those conversations, and it's starting that buddy system so that I now, as a new rep going out on the floor, feel like I have an ally. I have someone who's there, who's been in my shoes, right? I personally was an agent at one point, but I remember going to a center as a manager, and the first thing my agent thought is, he doesn't know what it's like. He's never been an agent. He doesn't know what it's like to be in my shoes. And so building those relationships, building those, those alliances and really that buddy through that program, both with new hires and existing staff, is really, really important as well. I'll tell you what I'd love to do. We have received so many questions, and I love it, and keep them coming in. Joe and Jenna, I want to ask some questions from the audience, if you're both okay with it, because we've, again, some really, really great questions coming in here. First one I want to start with, so one of the things I had mentioned earlier was possibly having a call library, and we had a couple of people send in notes about using a knowledge base. I just want to kind of ask this one, Joe, Jenna, really, whichever one you feel is comfortable with it. Joe, maybe we'll start with you. How do you think having a accessible knowledge base helps to improve agent training and their speed to competency?
Well, you're never going to know everything. The complexity of the call types we take these days has increased so much. And I was just on a call this morning about this. So if it sounds rehearsed, it's because I heard it I heard it talking with somebody this morning. The knowledge bases allow us to take out, especially external-facing ones to customers, allow us to take out so many of the simple contact types that we have, whether they're email, phone, chat, doesn't matter. So many of those are gone now, especially for companies that have implemented external knowledge bases. So what's left are these very complex call types. Agents aren't going to memorize everything. I used to know all the area codes, all the zip codes, all the, everything about telephony because I handled calls within telecom. But these days, you can't memorize all that stuff anymore. You can't memorize all the relevant stuff you need anymore. You have to be able to know where to look, and you have to know how to find it. So having an online knowledge base, a knowledge base they can reference, not only allows them to sift through all the complexities of the contact types they're taking, but it also allows them in their dead time, the ones that really want to be good at their job and hone their craft, it allows them pre- and post-shift and in the slow times to be able to go look up something that maybe they weren't so sure about. It's crucial that they not have to put their hand up and wait for a soup to walk by and answer a question for them. To find it on their own is great.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was in one center where they actually had balloons with helium in them at the desk, and whenever an agent needed someone, they released this balloon that went up into the air. And while I found the idea incredibly interesting, I also saw how often those balloons went up and how the poor supervisors were running around. That's a really great point that you make of having the information available. One thing I want to ask you, just kind of clarify, we talked about that buddy, and the question came up if the buddy, whether they're a fellow trainee or whether they're a tenured employee. Any thoughts on kind of some best practices that either of you have seen there as far as whether it's a new trainee or a tenured agent?
Yeah, so the way that we're approaching it right now in our new hire training is that it is actually a new hire. So they've had the same curriculum. The difference is there's one that's actually taking the call, interacting with the customer, and the other person is there to help them navigate the screens, for example, or help them find something if they get stuck. We do also do a great amount of listening in with tenured folks, interspersed with when they are on the phones, because that helps them kind of develop their own talk track, their own type of, adopt some things from those tenured folks that will help them as they move forward.
Great, thank you. That actually made me think of something here, and it relates to one of the questions that we've seen come in. So those tenured agents, we often see that they are the ones who see things that we maybe leaders don't necessarily see. They often have ideas. They often have suggestions, and those things can feed into our knowledge base, or if we have like a social learning community. So a question came in, what way are companies incentivizing agents to contribute their insight, their articles to the knowledge bases, or if you have a social sharing community, how are companies getting agents to share that knowledge and maybe those shortcuts that they're finding?
So without a knowledge base, without a true knowledge base that you're utilizing, that's difficult. You can incent agents with a small, like a Starbucks gift card. You can incent them with maybe, their soup has to take a half-hour calls for them if they give the best, the best new answer over the course of a week or something. But really the best way to do it is when you have a knowledge base where you can promote answers from the agent level up to a trainer, and then they get published once the trainer's vetted it out, or whoever has responsibility for vetting those answers. But it's ideal when your agents, as you all know, it's ideal for your agents to be able to give you feedback on what the customers are seeing and what customers need to know so that they don't have to spend the 5-7 minutes calling in to get answers themselves. So it's having a knowledge base where you can promote answers is the number one key there for me, Justin.
Yeah, and Joe, from my own personal experience, what I'll say on the back end of that is so often I come into contact centers and they try to make their agents really human sponges and cram all of this really specific information into their head. And they say, we have such limited time because we have to train on all of these things. And what I've found is when you invest in some of those kind of core concepts that I talked about, when you have a really good knowledge base on the back of that, what it becomes then, the time you spend in training, is you train the agent how to use the robust tool that has the insight, and then you don't have to train on maybe them being experts in all of those other pieces, because the reality is they're not going to retain it, they're not going to remember it all anyway. So have a really good tool, have a kind of a robust source for them, make them experts on the tool, and then you can spend time on those other concepts that when you've got someone in classroom, it can be much more meaningful and much more engaging with them.
Exactly.
I'm just doing a time check. Christine, how are we looking on things for today?
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to all your questions, don't worry. As I mentioned earlier, we will be able be sure to answer all your questions left in the queue. If you think of other questions, please feel free to reach out on Twitter. And also don't forget that you can download the PDF version of the slides through the console shortly after we end this presentation. I also do need to mention that this presentation is copyrighted by 2015 by ICMI. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by ICMI, which is solely responsible for its content, and Oracle is responsible for their own content and opinions. And on behalf of ICMI and our speakers and our sponsor, Oracle, we thank you for attending today.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.